Welcome back to our third presentation on apostrophes. Let's do a little bit of a refresher and then dive into new content. We're talking about apostrophes today, and there are three main times that we use apostrophes in written English. The first is to show ownership or possession, and that's what this presentation is going to cover. So let's go forward. We talked about how when we're talking about nouns, there's only one situation that we add something to the end of the noun in order to communicate the particular role that has in the English sentence, and that is in the genitive or the possessive case. So if we're using a boy as the subject of the sentence, we just say boy. The boy hit the ball. But if we're referring to the boy's bat, we add an apostrophe S to communicate we're talking about the bat that belongs to the boy. When we're using a noun in the accusative case, we just say boy. If we're using the dative case, we just say boy. So it's only in the genitive case we add the apostrophe S. Similarly with girl, only in the genitive case do we add the apostrophe S. In the plural case, we don't add any different. There's no difference in the way that we pronounce the words. So boys sounds just like boys in the genitive case, sounds just like boys in the accusative case in the dative case. The only difference is a visual one when it's being written, and we'll put an apostrophe after the S in the genitive case. So this is the only one that sounds different. We talked about the importance of word order, and we also talked about how we don't really have a lot of noun case in English, modern English. We do have a lot of pronoun case in modern English. And we can leverage, and that's what actually we're going to talk about in this session. We're going to talk about leveraging our knowledge of this table, and we all know this table by heart. Even though we might not have intuitively ever thought about it in this way. This is information we already possess. And we can use this information to help us sort through, when we are using a noun, what case that noun should be in. So here, this is where we were last together. We talked about how, This is where we talked about how we replace a noun with a pronoun. The boy, in the nominative case, we replace with he. Girl, when it's the object of the preposition, we replace with her. When we're saying the boys, in the genitive case, we replace it with his. Let's go to our next slide. This is where we're covering new material we haven't previously talked about. And we're going to talk about how, up until this point, we've talked primarily about how word order is the way we communicate meaning in English, because we don't have suffixes on our nouns with the exception of the genitive case. But when our sentences are littered with pronouns, we suddenly have more flexibility about changing word order. Here's some examples. These two sentences mean the same thing. When we use the regular word order, when we say he tripped her, we're communicating that he is the actor. He's the one with his foot out. She's the one who is falling over his foot. So he is the actor, and she is receiving the action of the trip. When we flip the her word and put at the beginning of the sentence, and we put he at the end of the sentence, but you notice we haven't changed the format of the words, and we say her tripped he, our first reaction is, gosh, that's confusing, because it's not the word order we expect. But then if someone were to say, tell me what that sentence means, and we thought about it for a while, most of us would decide it meant this. Her tripped he. It means he is the actor because it's in the nominative case, and her is the one who's receiving the action, the tripping, because she is in the objective case. Let's look at the next example. In this example, we have our initial sentence, so these sentences are the same. But this time, instead of changing the word order, we're going to change the case. So we're going to keep the third person masculine singular in this position, and we're changing the case from nominative to accusative. And we're going to take here the third person singular feminine and move it from the objective case to the nominative case. So our first sentence is, he tripped her. We know what's happening there. His foot is out. She's falling over the foot. Let's look at this sentence. Again, the word order is the same. We've just changed the case. Him tripped she. Again, it's confusing. It's not what we're expecting, but most of us would say this sentence here does not mean the same thing as this sentence. Most of us would say that what is being said is she tripped him. She is the actor. She's the one with her foot out blocking him that he's falling over. So you can see in this case, pronoun case trumps word order. But when we replace the pronouns with nouns, it doesn't work because the nominative case and the objective case for nouns doesn't change their endings. So we say Bob tripped Mary, there's no case to change. So Bob tripped Mary means the same thing as Bob tripped Mary. And if we put Mary in front and Bob in the second position, we have a very different meaning. So in this case, the only thing we have to go on is word order. Since there's no case that's obvious, in that situation with nouns, there is no case to trump word order. Okay, so you may be thinking at this point, okay, Groover, you talked to us for probably an hour approximately, and yet you've yet to tell us really anything about apostrophes. We're getting to it, I promise you, but all this is kind of setting us up, not just for apostrophes, but for a lot of other cool stuff we're going to be learning this semester. Okay, and the bottom line is to really get when to use an apostrophe, you have to understand how this genitive case works in English. If you don't get this, you can memorize the rule, but you're going to forget it because it doesn't have you don't have a deep understanding of it. You don't know why you're doing this. You just know that you're doing it. Okay, so let's look at the genitive case in English. The first thing to keep in mind is that when you and I use the genitive case, even if we don't know that there's something called the genitive case, we don't have to think about it. Almost none of us mess up the genitive case when we're speaking. Almost none of us write down the wrong word when we are writing. What we might make a mistake about is whether we put an apostrophe in or not. But the actual spelling of the word, we're probably going to nail. Okay, but let's look at some, and to prove that to you, let's look at some examples. How many of us would write this sentence? Bob spent Bob money. We wouldn't write this. We would write Bob spent Bob's money, right? How many of us would say he spent he money? None of us would say that. We'd say he spent his money. He spent him money? Does it make sense? We'd say he spent his money. How many of us would say Bob spent money Bob's? That's perhaps a more likely problem or situation because in some languages, words that modify the noun go after, but not in English. You have to have the genitive case noun in front of the noun that it is possessing. Similarly, we wouldn't say he spent money his. Doesn't sound right. We're going to have to put the his, which is in the pronoun genitive case, in front of the word that it is modifying or that it is possessing. So now we have all these sentences correct, and guess what? None of these were even a little bit hard. So you know this stuff. You know it deep in your bones. The problem is bubbling that knowledge up so you can access the knowledge when you need to. And the reason that this is tricky is because of the S problem we have in English. You may never have thought about this, but this is the reason why you get confused if you happen to struggle with this topic. We ask for the letter S to do at least 3 things. And actually, we ask it to do more than 3 things. But for the purpose of this lecture, we're just going to say it does 3 things. At the end of the word, we ask it to do 3 things. It would have been really, really smart of us as a language if we had decided to use a different sound for one or more of these purposes. But for whatever reason, we're stuck with S doing all 3 of these things. When you have one letter, one sound doing multiple things, it is inherently ambiguous. Did I mean use 1? Did I mean use 2? Or did I mean use 3? Who's to know? We can't hear it from the sound. We're looking for context. But sometimes context is ambiguous. And even when it's not ambiguous, it takes extra work to figure it out. So let's look at the 3 times we use this. And again, you know this stuff already, but I'm just going to make it explicit in your head. We use S to show that there's more than one. We use S to make most nouns plural. This is not big news. So if I have the word boy, it's singular. If I want to make it plural, we say boys. If I want to have girl, singular, but I want to have more than one girl in my story, I am going to put girls, right? This is not hard. That is pretty straightforward. We add an S. That's the usual rule. We also add the S sound to show possession, ownership, or relation. Again, this is a genitive case. If I want to talk about boy and he's a subject of my sentence, I write boy. If I want to talk about the boy's bat, I have to write boy apostrophe S bat. Let me just remove my boy. And that communicates to us that this is in the genitive case. You can't hear the apostrophe, but you can see the apostrophe. So that's the second function of the S. Then we also use S commonly as a contraction. Let's say we have the word it, 2 words, it is. Let's say we want to say it is late. That's a fine way to write, but most of us don't enunciate that clearly. We don't say it is late. We're going to say it's late. And the way we write that is like this. These are equivalent expressions, right? It is late, oops, means the same thing as it's late. And what we've done here is I've removed this I from is, and where the I was, I put an apostrophe. So you can see it's late means it is late. But when we say it, this S sounds just like the S in boy's bat, which sounds just like the S in the word boys, right? So it's challenging. There's inherent ambiguity in that situation. And so as a result, if we're not thinking clearly about which one of these tasks we're trying to accomplish, we might end up using the wrong tool. Because again, when we're speaking, we don't have to think consciously about them because they all sound the same. On some level, we know, but we haven't made it explicit in the way that we're communicating. Okay, so when we hear that S at the end of the word, we, the listener, or we, the reader, has to figure out what did the speaker, what did the writer intend? Did he intend to communicate this word as plural? Did he intend to communicate this word as in the genitive case? Or did he intend to indicate this word as part of a contraction? Let's look at a sentence here. This is an example. Maybe this is a spoken sentence, maybe this is a written sentence. There are boys in the room. Here are the 3 possible meanings that I, the speaker, or I, the writer, could have. I could have meant that there's more than one boy in the room. In other words, that this word is plural. I could have meant that there is only one boy and he's possessing something, meaning this use. Or I could have meant that there is one boy and I'm using contraction. One boy is or one boy has, like that. Now my guess is everybody immediately knows, given the structure, that this is what is meant. We mean there's more than one boy. You know that without really even thinking about it. But let's go through the steps and figure out how we know that. Now, I'm going to go through the steps with you, but keep in mind, I'm not saying this is new information. I'm not saying there's anything I'm saying right now that you don't know in spades. You know this stuff. What I'm trying to do is, in this really easy example, show how you can step by step unpack the information. So when you get to a sentence that isn't obvious to you, one that's really long and convoluted with lots of pieces and it's hard to know, you're going to be able to think back and say, how do I unpack it? How do I test to see which one of these I mean? Now we're going to do it. Okay. And we know the answer is the first. We mean plural. What are the clues that it's plural? Well, one is we have the word are. Of course, we don't say there are boy or there are a boy. That doesn't sound right. Are is plural, and so therefore boys has to be plural. If we wanted to talk about only one boy, we would have said there is probably a boy in the room, right? That makes sense. If we had there is boys, oops, there is boys, there's something doesn't sound quite right there if we meant it to be plural. So this is our indication that our primary indication that we want this to be a plural word. We know that it's not possessing something because look, after boys we have the preposition in. So what is boys possessing? Well, boys can't possess a preposition. And so therefore, because there's nothing after boys that boys can possess, it can't be in the possessive form. If we wanted to say there are boys bats in the room, then yes, this could be boys bats. Or it could be maybe there are the boys bats in the room. That would work because we have something that the boys can possess after the word bats. But we don't have that. We just have the word in, which doesn't allow possession. So we're going to rule out this choice. This is bad. Let's look at the last choice. Well, let's test it. We know that the apostrophe S as a contraction can be made with either is or has. So let's see. There are boy is in the room. Well, that makes no sense. Let's try has. There are boy has in the room. Well, that doesn't make any sense. So we've ruled out this one, and we've ruled out this one, and we've looked at this one, and this makes sense. So yes, this has got to be the answer. So this is the journey. We know the three ways. We evaluate each one and see which one works. Okay, so you may be thinking to yourself, possibly you are, why do we use the apostrophe? I mean, after all, when we speak, we don't hear the apostrophe. When you and I speak, there's a lot of information that is going back and forth. I'm making eye contact. I may be gesturing. You, the listener, have the opportunity to ask a question or to show in your face a quizzical or disbelieving look that communicates to me, hey, I'm not doing a good job communicating here. I, the speaker, can also change the tone of my voice, speak louder, speak slower, raise the volume, lower the volume, emphasize certain words. Lots of different ways I can communicate meaning. I can also point, do other things along those lines. But when the reader is reading written words, we're losing all of that. You can't hear the voice. You can't ask the writer questions. The only thing you have are the words and punctuation. That's the one win with writing. You have all these awesome wins with spoken English, all these things that you get, that you're giving up when you get to the written word. But the one thing you get with the written word is punctuation. You know, when I speak to you, I don't punctuate my sentence. I don't say, hello, comma, my name is Professor Groover, period. I am happy to be here, period. I am looking forward to getting to know you, period. I don't speak that way. It would be weird if I did. It would be weird and confusing and distracting for you if I did. But if I didn't use punctuation when I wrote, you would find it confusing because you're missing out on all those hints that you have with spoken English. So the apostrophe is like all that other punctuation we have. The comma, the question mark, the period, the exclamation point, the quotation marks, the dash. All of those things communicate meaning, help resolve ambiguity. And that's the function of the apostrophe. The apostrophe is to help the reader sort through and make sense of the statement. So that's why we're going to use the apostrophe. Believe it or not, the apostrophe there is not there to make it harder for the reader or the writer. It's there to make it easier and to make communication more seamless. Okay. So now we're going to talk about when we use the apostrophe and how to decide when you're confronted with a sentence that you know when you hear it in your head, there's an S sound at the end, but what you're not sure about is whether you need an apostrophe or not. Well, there's 3 steps to this process that we're going to use. The first is you got to know what the rule is. You got to know how the English written language uses the nominative, the genitive case. You also need to decide whether that rule applies. Is this noun actually, should it be in the genitive case or not? And you have the third step only if you've decided that, well, yes. Step 2 does lead me to the conclusion that this rule applies, that rule 1 applies. So if you've concluded that, then you go to step 3, which is, we know the noun is possessive, but the question is it also plural? Okay, so here's a little picture about how this works. This is the flow chart. The first thing, again, we're going to do is recall the possessive apostrophe rule. And let me pause here and talk about rules. It is rare that I write any document longer than a page that I do not refer to grammar rules. It's probably safe to say that I have a pretty robust understanding of grammar. It's not imperfect. I mean, it is imperfect. It's certainly not infallible. There are holes in my knowledge, but I have a pretty robust understanding. And even I, when I write something of almost any length, I'm going to think to myself, now, which way does that rule work? I do it all the time. If you don't have a very robust understanding of grammar, you'll probably find that you need to look up the rules, maybe not every sentence, but probably every paragraph, probably several times on a given page. The good thing about doing that is if you look up a rule enough times, you're going to remember it. And once we've gone through these rules and you've seen the reason behind the rules, you may find that you have to look them up less frequently. But it's okay to look it up. There is no shame whatsoever in looking up rules. It's one of the reasons we have that Aspen legal handbook as one of your textbooks. So it's available for you so you can, in fact, look up the rules. That's why we want you to do that. We want you to do it all the time. So don't feel like you have to memorize these rules. Instead, I mean, you're going to need to memorize it for this class for some purposes, but in the long haul, 6 years from now, you're not going to remember necessarily all these rules, but you're going to remember how to look them up, how to find them. So you're going to find the rule or remember the rule, whichever is the case. Then you're going to decide whether that rule applies, and then you're going to decide if it applies whether the noun is plural or singular. This is the steps, 1, 2, 3. Let's go to step 1. Let's refresh on what the rule is. Written English requires an apostrophe in the noun, genitive, or possessive case. That's the rule. I've broken down the rule a little bit more. Let's first of all consider singular nouns. When you're dealing with a singular noun, you put the apostrophe before the S. Let's go back, look at our example here. Look here, in the singular case, we do the word apostrophe S, the word apostrophe S. So that's pretty easy peasy to do. For regular plural nouns, the apostrophe comes after the S. So it's S apostrophe. And here we go. Yes, exactly the same position. It's boys, then we add the apostrophe. Girls, and then we add the apostrophe. Let's go back to what I crossed out momentarily. And that is that there are some words in English that are made plural in an irregular format. For example, the word child. We don't say childs, right? we say children. So when we're talking about the child's toy, we only have one child, so we use the apostrophe S. When we're talking about the children's toy, we use that same format. Children, apostrophe S, because there is no S after children. So we need to add the S. It's not inherent. There's no inherent S on the plural of child. So do apostrophe S. Let's do another example. The woman's book. We have one woman. She has a book. We're going to add apostrophe S. But we don't say woman's to make it plural. We say women. So if we wanted to say the women's book, we make the word woman plural, women. Doesn't end in an S, so we add apostrophe S. And the same pattern for if we had the word man. Same way. So if the noun becomes plural in an irregular manner, meaning it doesn't end with an S, we follow the singular noun rule. Hopefully that makes sense. You already know this. This isn't hard to think about. You may not have thought about it consciously, but that's the rule. So that's step 1. You look up the rule if you don't know it. Let's go to step 2. Now we're going to decide whether the noun is possessive or not. And many times you'll just know. So if you know, that's fine, that's great, let's move on. But this is what you're going to use when you don't know, you're not sure. we're going to leverage our pronoun case system. And I'm going to recommend that we use the singular pronoun he or the plural pronoun they. The reason that I like to use these is that you can see the nominative case is different than the genitive case, which is different than the objective case. The nominative case is different than the genitive case, which is different from the objective case. She and it doesn't change case in each one of those. So if you have a noun that's feminine or a noun that doesn't have a gender, it may sound kind of weird to use he, but it's a little bit easier to spot the issue. So that's why we're doing it. If you find that confusing, you can definitely use she, her, it, it's, it, and you'll get it. You'll find that will probably largely work for you. So if using the he throws you for a loop, you can use these methods as well. Okay, so what you're going to do is you're going to replace your noun that you aren't sure. You're hearing an S sound on it, but you're not sure whether it's in the nominative case, the genitive case, or the objective case. You're going to replace that noun with each one of these words to see which one makes grammatical sense and logical sense. Let's go through it and see. So this is the paradigm we're using. We're going to replace our noun with his and also with theirs and see if it makes sense. So here we have. Let me go back. Actually, we'll use examples in a couple seconds so you can see it clearly. But this is the idea. If this works, if his makes sense or their makes sense, you know the noun is possessive. If they don't make sense, you know your noun is of another case. So you aren't going to need an apostrophe. Simple as that. Now we're ready for the third step. We know the noun is possessive. Otherwise, we're not even going to do the third step. And so now your decision is it possessive and plural? In other words, you're going to do the S apostrophe, or is it singular and possessive? Are you going to do the apostrophe S? Okay. So here you're going to distinguish between the his. At this point, you can use her or its, and the their. If there is what you, the writer, meant, if you meant more than one, then you're going to be able to say, or if you're reading someone else's writing, you're going to say, well, do they mean more than one? Well, yeah, because there makes sense in that context. So if it's if his makes sense, well, then you know that the noun in the genitive case is singular possessive, so it's going to be apostrophe S. If their makes sense, you know that the noun should be plural in the genitive case, so it's going to be S apostrophe. Okay, with that, we're going to be done with this lecture. We have one more lecture on this PowerPoint before we move on to the second PowerPoint. In that next lecture, we're going to apply this three-step process to some examples to see how it works out in real life. Thank you for your attention, and I will see you soon.